Today I want to tell you a story so quiet it hurts, set in the frozen heart of the American West, where winter didn't just test survival, it decided who would be remembered and who would be erased. This was a place where loneliness traveled faster than the wind, and fate crossed paths with mercy in the most unforgiving cold. It all began with something small, a thin trail of smoke rising from a lonely cabin, yet it was enough to change everything. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The winter of 1897 settled over Silver Creek Valley like a sentence handed down by an unseen judge, a crushing shroud of white, intent on burying both memory and hope. It did not arrive softly the way snow does in dime novels, but tore in with a savage wind that shook the timbers of scattered homesteads along the ridge. Frost behaved like a living creature crawling across the windows of a small time-worn cabin, sketching sharp, crooked veins that sealed the world outside from view. For those inside, the frost felt like iron bars. Each day the quiet pressed harder, until silence itself grew loud. The air indoors offered little mercy, barely warmer than the knife-edged cold beyond the walls. May Carter stood at the kitchen window, her breath catching as faint, fleeting clouds bloomed and vanished against the glass. She was 20, yet the last months had carved a tiredness into her face that belonged to someone far older. At her side stood her twin Lily Carter, identical in every way, save for a tiny mole along her left earlobe. Both wore pale pink prairie dresses their mother had sewn for a spring festival 2 years before, back when color and laughter still lived in the house. Time and hardship had dulled the cloth. The hems were worn thin, the color faded and out of place against the brutal gray of winter. Wool shawls lay heavy over fragile cotton, but the cold slipped through all the same, settling deep in their bones. Together they watched the snow fall in a relentless hush, a white curtain that erased the road leading back to town. Behind them, the cast-iron stove gave off a weak, grudging warmth. The woodshed was down to its last quarter. What logs remained would have to last until thaw, which the farmer's almanac and the ache in their joints promised would not come before late March. For weeks, May had been running hard numbers in her head, the same careful figures she once used to balance Samuel Carter's ledger at the mercantile. Now there was nothing left to count. Their father, a dignified man who had crossed the ocean chasing land, and possibility had died in the fall of 1896. Rose Carter followed 6 months later. The laughter that once warmed the drafty cabin was carried off by a fever that swept the valley as fast as a grass fire. Now it was December 24th. The cupboard held a small sack of rice, less than a cup of dried beans, and 1 jar of pickled vegetables they had been stretching since October. "It's sticking," Lily whispered, her voice thin as glass. She pressed her palm to the frozen pane. "The snow. It's not letting up," she said again. May reached for her sister's hand, gripping it tight. "It'll pass, Lily. Storms always do." Lily turned dark eyes, searching her twin's face. "And after that, we've got nothing for tomorrow. No offering for the Carter ancestors, no supper for us. It's Christmas Eve and there's nothing." May looked away. The fear in Lily's eyes was her own reflected too clearly. "We've got each other," she said, though the words rang hollow over the low growl of hunger. "And rice. We'll make porridge. We'll get by." She knew better. Silver Creek Valley showed no mercy. It favored men with strong backs and full cellars, not 2 orphaned Chinese sisters with no livestock and dwindling stores. Out here, that kind of winter usually ended one way. They had tried to keep the farm alive, but summer drought had killed the garden, and the quiet prejudice of the Silver Creek folk made trading near impossible. In town, eyes followed them, prices crept higher, and doors closed faster. In the end, they withdrew to the cabin, hoping to outlast the season on what their father had left behind. The savings were gone. The quiet inside the cabin carried weight thick enough to press on the chest. In the corner, the grandfather clock marked each second with cold precision. Once that ticking had been comforting the steady pulse of a living home. Now it sounded like a tally being kept counting down something neither sister wanted to name. May Carter turned from the window and faced the bare kitchen table. She had scrubbed it the day before, not out of need, but habit. The wood grain showed clearly where the finish had long since worn away, polished smooth by years of family meals that would never be shared again. "I should check the trap lines," May said, stepping toward the door, even though she knew they had come up empty for more than a week. "No," Lily Carter said sharply, catching her arm. "It's too cold. The wind's screaming, May. If you lose your way in that whiteout." She stopped herself. There was no need to finish. They both understood. Being alone was frightening. Being the one left behind was worse than dying. May nodded once and drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She crossed to the stove and fed it a single small log. It was a risk. That wood might be needed come January, but cold was already creeping through the floorboards, rattling their teeth. Outside, the fading afternoon light drained from the sky, staining the gray world, a deep, bruised purple. The temperature sank with it. May was just accepting the idea of supper being nothing more than thin rice water, when a noise broke through the wind, a dull, steady thud, then wood shifting. A moment later came the unmistakable jingle of a harness. Both sisters went still. Visitors were rare out here. Visitors during a blizzard were unheard of. In the Old West, a stranger at an isolated cabin could mean rescue or ruin. May moved to the drawer where Samuel Carter had once kept his revolver, though there were no bullets left. She wrapped her hand around a heavy piece of steel instead, gripping it for courage. "Stay behind me," May whispered to Lily. The sounds stopped just outside the porch. Boots crunched against frozen snow. Then 3 hard knocks struck the door. Measured. Intentional. May waited. The knocking came again. "Miss Chen, Miss Lee." A deep voice called, muffled by the thick door. "It's Ethan Grant, from the ridge west of here." May lowered the weapon slightly. Ethan Grant. She knew that name. A rancher living 3 miles west. Their father had spoken of him with respect, quiet fare in his dealings, a man who paid what he owed and never looked at their family with the suspicion the Silver Creek folk often did. May crossed to the door and slid back the bolt with shaking fingers. She opened it just enough for winter to force its way inside snow, swirling across the floor like a living thing. Standing on the porch, framed by the dying light, was a broad, imposing figure. Ethan Cole stood in his late 40s, his face lined and tough as cured leather eyes creased from years squinting into sun and wind. Snow dusted his heavy buffalo coat, his hat pulled low. Behind him waited a wagon hitched to a massive roan horse, steam pouring from its nostrils. Mr. Cole May said, her voice steady, despite the cold. He removed his hat, revealing hair streaked with gray at the temples. "Truth is, I've got myself a problem. Bought too much, more than I can handle." A faint shrug. "With snow like this, I can't leave fresh food sitting in the wagon and the barn's no better. Ruin's easy." He hesitated, choosing his words. I was hoping you might do me a favor. Take some off my hands. Neighbors helping neighbors." May glanced at Lily Carter. Her sister's eyes were wide. They both knew better. No one overbought in winter. You stockpiled, and nothing spoiled in the cold, it simply froze. It was charity carefully wrapped to protect their pride. "We could pay you," May said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "Didn't ask for payment." His voice softened. "You'd be helping me keep good food from going to waste. Clara, my wife, she hated waste. Would have come back to haunt me if I let it feed wolves." He didn't wait for an answer. Turning, he trudged back through the snow boots, crunching hard. Moments later, he returned, hauling a large wooden crate with ease, far more weight than either sister could have lifted alone. He stepped inside, kicked the snow from his boots, and set the crate squarely on the table. "Now," he said, rubbing his hands for warmth. "There's a turkey in the wagon. Big one, already dressed, and a ham. Smoked it myself." May moved closer and peered inside. Her breath caught. Potatoes, real ones, still dusted with earth. A sack of white flour, a bag of sugar, a jar of honey. Coffee beans so dark and rich the smell made her dizzy. Thick cuts of beef wrapped in butcher paper. Ethan disappeared again, returning with a canvas sack and a massive ham. Sweet, smoky air filled the frozen room. A third trip brought the turkey. When he finally finished the kitchen table, bare moments before, bowed under the weight of a feast. The twins stood frozen. It was too much. It was weeks, months of survival. A lifeline thrown into deep water. "Why?" May asked, lifting her face to him. Tears spilled free, freezing along her cheeks. "Why would you do this for us? We were strangers." Ethan Cole lingered by the door, clearly uneasy under their gratitude. He brushed snow from his sleeve and shook his head. "You're not strangers," he said quietly. "You're neighbors. And out here that makes you family." He paused, emotion roughening his voice. "Besides, my wife died 3 winters ago. And my daughter." His breath caught. "She would have been about your age." His gaze rested on the 2 sisters, shivering in their faded pink dresses. The grief in his eyes ran deep old as the land itself. "Folks brought me food back then, checked on me, a faint, bitter smile. I didn't want any of it. I was mad at the world. But it kept me alive. I'm just settling accounts," he said, turning toward the door. "Best get the horse back to the barn before the drifts rise." "Stay," Lily Carter said suddenly. The single word hung in the air. May Carter looked from her sister to Ethan. "Please," she added. "Stay. We can't cook all this by ourselves." "And no one ought to be alone on Christmas Eve," Lily said softly. Ethan hesitated. He glanced toward the black, frozen ride waiting outside, then back to the cabin where the sisters had just lit the kerosene lamp, its warm glow pushing against the dark. He looked at the food piled on the table, then at the 2 young women watching him, not with fear, but with a fragile, rising hope. "I still need to see to the horse," he said almost apologetically. "There's a stall in the barn," May replied. "It's empty. There's hay left." "And we'll make coffee," Lily added. "Real coffee." Slowly a smile cracked across Ethan's weathered face, breaking the shell of solitude he'd worn for 3 long years. "Well," he said, pulling the door shut against the wind, "I reckon 1 cup of coffee won't do any harm." The hours that followed passed in a warm blur, turning the once gloomy cabin into a place of light and life. Ethan proved useful far beyond his wagon. He went out to the woodpile, and working by feel in the dark, chopped and hauled enough logs to fill the box beside the stove stoking the fire, until the cast iron glowed with a heat they hadn't known in weeks. The twins moved together with quiet, practiced harmony that caught Ethan's eye. May prepared the ham, scoring the fat, and brushing it with honey and a touch of sugar. Lily peeled potatoes, her hands quick and sure. They spoke little, communicating with glances and small nods, but the heaviness was gone, replaced by a charged, hopeful energy. The scent of brewing coffee, strong, dark, and life-giving, filled the room. Ethan sat in the corner chair, carving at a small piece of wood, watching them with calm satisfaction. "Clara," he said at last, breaking the silence as the ham hissed in the oven. "She used to make dumplings. Little pockets of dough." Jiaozi Mei said, turning from the flour she was measuring for biscuits. "We make them too, for the New Year. But we don't have cabbage or pork." Ethan rose and crossed to the crate, digging deep, before pulling out a smaller wrapped bundle he hadn't mentioned earlier. "This pork," he asked, holding up a slab of bacon and a parcel of ground sausage. "And I think there's an onion in the sack." The twins exchanged a look, a bright spark of joy flashing between them. "We can make them," Lily Carter said, clapping her hands once. "We can make dumplings." And just like that, the lines that usually split the valley seemed to melt away in the warmth of the kitchen. Ethan Cole watched as the sisters worked the dough, rolling it thin with a glass bottle in place of a rolling pin. They filled each wrapper with sausage and onion folding, and sealing them with quick, sure fingers that moved like something close to magic. In return, Ethan showed them how to make cowboy biscuits, working bacon grease into the dough until it turned rich, hearty, and filling. By the time the food was ready, the blizzard outside felt distant, almost forgotten. Wind hammered the walls, but the cabin stood solid, held together by the stove's heat and the simple strength of people sharing space. They dragged the table closer to the fire. The meal was a patchwork feast: glazed ham, roasted potatoes, soft biscuits, and a wide platter of steaming dumplings. It was a supper that ignored borders, a table that could exist nowhere but the American West. They took their seats. Ethan felt oversized and awkward in the small chair, but he didn't mind. May Carter and Lily had draped their shawls over the chair backs. The warmth finally allowed them to sit comfortably in their pink dresses. May glanced at the food and spoke quietly. "We usually say a prayer to the Carter ancestors, to invite them to eat with us." Ethan inclined his head. "I'd be honored." The sisters closed their eyes, bowing their heads. In soft Cantonese, they invited the spirits of Samuel Carter and Rose Carter to share in the abundance, thanking them for watching over the house. When they finished, they looked to Ethan. "I usually say grace," he said. He bowed his head. "Lord, we thank you for this food. We thank you for unexpected company. Bless this house and these young women." His voice faltered. "And tell Clara Cole I miss her." "Amen." "Amen," the sisters whispered. They ate with the fierce appetite of people who had been starving for more than food. The ham was sweet and salty, melting at the tongue. The biscuits were warm and grounding. When Ethan tried a dumpling, his eyes widened. That he said, pointing with his fork, "is the best thing I've tasted in 20 years. Lily giggled a sound that startled even her. She hadn't laughed since spring. As the meal went on, stories found their way to the table. Ethan talked about his youth driving cattle west, when the land was still open and wild before fences claimed it. He spoke of Clara Cole without fresh pain, only the gentle ache of a scar long healed. The twins shared memories of their journey across the ocean. The salt air, the endless water, the shock of mountains rising from the land. They spoke of Samuel's dream of building something lasting, and Rose's insistence that they never lose their language. Later, with their third cups of coffee warming their hands, Ethan asked, "Those dresses, they're real pretty, but they don't seem meant for winter." May looked down at the faded pink cloth, smoothing a frayed hem. "Our mother made them. For the spring festival. It was the last thing she sewed before she got sick." She swallowed. "We wear them when we need to feel close to her, when we need to remember that spring always comes back." Ethan said nothing for a long while. He stared into the fire, its glow flickering in his blue eyes. "She was right," Ethan Cole said quietly. "Spring always comes back." His voice softened. "But sometimes you need a hand getting through the winter to live long enough to see it." He reached into his coat and drew out a small leather pouch, setting it on the table between them. "I didn't want to bring this up before supper," he said. "But your father, Samuel Carter, did some work for me years ago, helped fix a fence line the flood tore out." He paused. "I tried to pay him. He wouldn't take it, said it was just neighborly." May Carter frowned. "Father never mentioned that. He wouldn't," Ethan replied. "Proud man." He took a breath. "So I set the money aside, put it into a few head of cattle. It grew." He nudged the pouch toward them. It hit the table with a solid clink. "That isn't charity." May opened her mouth, but Ethan stopped her with a look. "It's a return on an investment. It belongs to you. It should be enough for seed come spring," he went on, "and maybe some warmer clothes to finish out the winter." May loosened the pouch. Inside were gold coins, real ones, heavy in her palm. More money than either sister had ever held. It wasn't just food or shelter. It was tomorrow, Mr. Cole Lily Carter whispered. "Ethan," he corrected gently. "If we're sharing dumplings, you don't get to keep calling me Mister." Ethan May said, her voice shaking. "We can't accept this." "You can and you will," he said firmly, leaving no space for argument. "Because I'm an old man with no family and I need help. I need people who can handle figures, keep books. The ranch is getting too big for me to manage the numbers alone." He gave a faint smile. "I hear you two are sharp with math." It was partly a story, a way to give them dignity, along with the help. But as he looked at them, steady and capable despite everything they'd endured, he realized it wasn't entirely false. They were survivors. Exactly the kind this valley needed. "We are good with numbers," May admitted, a small smile breaking through. "Then it's settled," Ethan said, slapping his knee. "Business partners." Night settled deep around the cabin, but the fear that had haunted it for months was gone, driven out by the smell of roast turkey and the murmur of voices. They sat by the fire until the embers dimmed. Ethan slept in the armchair, refusing the sister's bed, his heavy coat pulled around him like a blanket. May and Lily slept together beneath their quilts. For the first time in months, May didn't dream of cold. She dreamed of spring green shoots breaking through dark soil, clear water, running in the creek, pink dresses, lifting and turning in a warm breeze. Christmas morning dawned sharp and bright. The storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed clean, dusted in diamond snow. The sun hung hard and shining in the sky. After a breakfast of reheated leftovers and strong coffee, Ethan hitched the roan to his wagon, now light and empty, and rode out into the clear, white day. "I'll be back in a few days," Ethan Cole said from the porch. "I'll take a look at those books we talked about and bring more firewood. That pile's looking thin." "We'll be here," May Carter replied. She stood beside Lily Carter, both wrapped in their shawls, standing a little straighter than they had the day before. "Merry Christmas," May Ethan said, tipping his hat. "Merry Christmas, Lily." "Merry Christmas, Ethan," they answered together. They watched him ride away, his figure dark against the blinding white spread of the valley. He wasn't just a neighbor anymore. He wasn't simply a rancher passing through. He was the man who had crossed a frozen distance of grief and quiet prejudice to reach them. May turned to Lily. "He's right, you know." About what Lily asked, her eyes following the wagon until it vanished. "Spring's coming," May said. She glanced down at her pink dress, then lifted her gaze to the clear blue sky. "And until it does, we'll be just fine." They went back inside and closed the door. It was still a small wooden cabin on a lonely ridge. The wind still cut sharp, and the world beyond remained unforgiving. But when the latch clicked, it no longer sounded like a cage locking shut. It sounded like a home warm and safe, holding the last scent of turkey, the quiet promise of tomorrow, and the unseen, unbreakable threads of a family chosen in the heart of winter. The season had come to collect its due. but love unexpected and hard-earned had paid the debt in full. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening, and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.